Well, great. Are we ready to begin? Do we have a thumbs up to go ahead?
I'm good if you both are.
Well, greetings and welcome to our Working for Justice Within Center Region Politics. We are Leslie, Jeff, and Melanie, three original founding members of the 320 Coalition. We began with a small but mighty group of concerned and committed community members, focusing on demanding justice over a wrongful death of Osaze Osagi, a 29-year-old son of two university professors and dear friends. We hope this presentation serves to remind the community that we have been successful in mobilizing our community and making meaningful change. And there's still work to be done, so don't be a passive listener. Become an advocate for justice. Let us begin. The 320 Coalition mission and purpose. The mission for the 320 Coalition is to advocate for victims of police brutality and murder, and to create citizen power for police reform, racial justice, mental health reform, all in Center County. We work for justice for Osaze Osagi and towards the goal that it will never happen again in our community. The 320 Coalition is an action-oriented alliance between the diverse groups of people and organizations that are committed to working collectively toward reform and change in State College. The alliance was created in the wake of the brutal police shooting of Osaze, and we advocate on his behalf and on behalf of the family and on behalf of the Penn State community. The continuous mission is to seek justice and change our local, state, and national structures that contributed to his death. Yep.
Our committee is one that has been in operation since the founding of the coalition. We work to reform policy, organizational procedures that stand in the way of justice, and we devise strategies to ensure that our demands are being met and ensures that the borough and the county follow through on their resolutions. We advocate for reallocation of community resources to more adequately support those experiencing mental health crises. Our main purpose is to be a presence in local government and other existing power structures to create change. If we are not in those spaces, our voices are not heard. Our primary focus from the beginning has been on policing practices, police accountability, and mental health. And we've expanded that a little bit this year, which we'll talk about later. So at the beginning, in 2019, our committee began work as one of the bodies committed to this work immediately after Osaze was murdered. We are the arm of the 320 Coalition that is working within existing power structures. So we want to be in those spaces. We want to be having an impact in local government and local systems. And in particular, our first two areas and really bodies of focus were the State College Borough Council, because that is the government body that has oversight of the State College Police Department. We wanted within that space to push for a proper investigation to try to get the unanswered questions answered and to implement a community review board, which was initially recommended in 2016 in the Task Force on Policing People of Color and was not prioritized. So it wasn't in place at the time of Osaze's murder. We also focused on the Center County Commissioners because that is the body that allocates funding and sets up the structure for mental health services within the county. So we aimed at pushing for reform, making those services more accessible, expanding the availability of those services, and also making sure that they are equitable. On May 8th of 2019, that's the date that District Attorney Cantorna released his report exonerating the three officers who were involved in the shooting. we mobilized for that and made sure that our voices were heard to ask the questions that were not being answered or unsatisfactorily answered. We also participated in a June 27th county town hall on mental health. And that was a really important push for us as a coalition and a committee. And Melanie will talk about that a little bit on the next slide. We also expanded our work to meeting with local and state representatives. So there were a lot of one-on-one meetings and small group meetings with people in state government, in local government, to make them aware that this had happened and ask them, how are you going to be involved? How are you going to be of help in trying to push for truth and accountability?
Thank you, Jeff. I've got a house full of children, so I've tried to barricade myself in a room. We'll see how that goes. So to expand on that early mental health work that we were talking about, the advocacy of members of the 320 Coalition led to conversations. We collected testimonials from people in our community who have dealt with the gaps that exist in our mental health services that we have at that countywide level. And then there was that push to go to the commissioners and to call for this town hall, which you can see in the YouTube video, the YouTube link that's there. We were pushing for permanent, let me move this right here, permanent supportive housing, additional mid-level supports so that people do not get to crisis. It's very important that we fill in those gaps that exist there to make sure that people are able to access the care that they need. Support drop-in crisis centers, and also the removal of guns from mental health crisis responses. This is so important. Nobody can get shot if a gun is not present. Osaze would be here today if a gun were not present at his crisis. And then county and state college borough formed the mental health task force as a result of this advocacy, of these meetings, of this pushing from the community, from the 320 Coalition. And we do have one coalition member represented on the task force. And the primary focus of that mental health task force is on mental health crises and a continuum of care to make sure that in every facet of somebody's mental health journey, that is accessible to the people who need to care for them. And so that there aren't any gaps in that. Next slide. So we, as far as the Borough Council goes, have attended meetings since Osaze was murdered. Our focus when we're attending these meetings is to get accountability to unanswered questions. We've been pushing on this since the very beginning. There is a public hour where people from the public get to speak. We typically get a couple of minutes and you can prepare a statement. These can be focus statements on whatever is not on the agenda. We were talking about the implementation of the review board and the civilian oversight board, transparency on training and policing data, and keeping the cause alive. It's very important to make sure that the people who are sitting on the Borough Council, the Borough Council manager, the chief of police, everybody on every level understands that the community is committed, we care, we're there, and we're not going anywhere. And that's been our focus since the very beginning.
It's 1 year later and we're still moving. And Melanie and Jeff and other members have been attending those Borough Council meetings weekly, sometimes marathon meetings, 4 hours or long. And we've suffered from the hands of abuse or abusive statements directed at us as individuals who care and have concerns to bring. But I would encourage people, it can be small concerns in your neighborhood, in your township. Show up, and raise your voice. It's important. Even if they don't want you there or welcome you there, they have to listen to your statement. It has to be recorded for the record. And then you ask and follow up and demand a reply. So 1 year later, we're still doing that. And there's a slow commitment for moving. Our borough commitments until June, right? It took a long time. It took a long time for them to realize that they had a membership with the League of Cities. And we had provided information about that, encouraging them to move deeper into what that National League of Cities could provide, internal training. And so we showed up every week asking for a diversity topic or to be put on the agenda for them to acknowledge these things. And they eventually did. They also eventually enrolled in a program with the National League of Cities called REAL. And it's real because they will help build a race equity plan for your city. And hopefully they will do that once they get their training. Additional discussions that the 320 Coalition has been instrumental in providing resources for and motivation for and recommendations on strategies was the discussion and the outgrowth of creating a Citizens Review Board. We called it a Community Oversight Board, and that's what we'd like to call it. And they have knowledge of this through the National, NCOLI, I think is the institute's name, and they know about it, but they have done nothing with that. And so they did eventually give in and establish a ad hoc review board or committee to discuss our recommendation for implementing the COB. And so that's still underway. Even though they've released the ad hoc committee, there's discussion still going on. The 320 Coalition also pushed for the viewing of footage and protocols to be developed for body cams. Now, other townships had use of body cams, but Speight College didn't. And so they got money and funding and they had it and they instituted it, and yet the policy wasn't made public. So we showed up and we demanded the policy be made public. And eventually they did a presentation and we were able to do that. They also had an IACP review done of their policies and procedures, which we are still finding questionable and weak at the best. They have not they did publish that review and they're still talking about what can be implemented. But again, we have to be consistent in prodding and poking them to say, what have you done? Have you made any strides on the recommendations that were made? Did you find additional gaps in the reporting where you know you need to make correction? And they have not been forthwith with that information, but we are still ever hopeful. The Mental Health Task Force assembled and did their work. It took us a very long time to do that work and come up with our list of recommendations as well. And we were delayed as our chair, Billy Willits, unexpectedly died just before Thanksgiving. And then a new chair had to be formed and assembled, and we had to have services for her before we could move forward. And we did valiantly. Patricia Best took leadership over that committee, and we successfully pulled together a list of recommendations and made the presentation to the borough and the county. They have now commenced working together and had a working session together, and that information can also be viewed on cnet1.org. Additional delays, of course, the borough says, and we understand through COVID. We're now working through it and working around it. We also experienced the delay of the CAN helpline, which has been here, I don't know, Jeff, was that 35 years or 40 years?
Something like that.
And then it was unexpectedly closed because they didn't renew the contract. And we, as a task force, were able to work with the county, and they agreed that we could keep the line and move it into the new community resource, the drop-in crisis center. And so that line is still viable for us to use, and it's still somebody else is going to pick up that line and be able to help and assist our community members. So that's an important service that we were able to maintain, even though the mental health task force was striving to expand our services by adding a new, fresh one. And in that February, we found ourselves having to shuffle to move and open the other center quickly and lost it. So we're back down to one. June 2020, our 10 demands. Well, we tried to organize and limit our demands to 10. We have more, but that was a good start. That's what I'm going to say. These documents also can be found online. The borough had agreed to publish them, so they are on their webpage. Put in the 10 demands and you can read all about them. But you will note that we wanted to implement the Community Advisory Board. We wanted to divest guns from the service of mental health. And these still remain challenges that we're working through. Yeah.
So when things changed radically in June 2020, in terms of the attention paid to issues that the 320 Coalition was raising, not that the issues themselves changed, we put out our 10 demands in concert with the largest social justice demonstrations that the Center Region had ever seen. And it was a very important opportunity to point out that as folks were rightly outraged and distraught over George Floyd's death, over Ahmaud Arbery's death, over Breonna Taylor's death, we needed to point out the fact that we had an event that was just as unjust not a year before. And this led to us releasing these 10 demands that Leslie recapped. And the amount of public attention and support behind these things gave a push to some of our local leaders to be very responsive and very helpful. So Dan Murphy, who was a State College Borough Council member, wrote a letter of support with 6 points of a plan that he wanted to put into place in order to push racial justice forward. And this was actually the same day as our Direct Action Committee's occupation of the Borough Building lobby, which I want to point out because it's a really beautiful example of the inside out strategy, in the sense that our committee, we feel, is very important and does important work, and does not get anywhere near as far if folks are not agitating in the sense of raising the issue, making sure that it stays in the public consciousness, making sure that there is peaceful pressure put on our institutions. So as a result of this letter being drafted by Dan Murphy, he and another member of the Borough Council, Deanna Bering, drafted Resolution 1258, the first page of which you can see there. That's also available online on the borough's website. And this resolution addressed 8 of these 10 demands, some of them more satisfactorily than others. It mentioned all 10, saying that because of ongoing litigation, it could not fulfill 2 of them. But this resolution, even though it was not perfect, it's important to recognize it as a really momentous occasion in terms of our goals as a coalition. It's also important to recognize that it passed unanimously. Every single member of council who was present, one was absent, voted for it. So as we look at how the year progressed, that's important to keep in mind. The most concrete action in this resolution was on the release of policing data and the Community Oversight Board. And those were things that happened fairly quickly, at least in the initial stages. So I want to give a little bit of an overview in terms of what went really well, what was really great about 2020 as the summer wore on and into the fall, about some of these things we've mentioned and some of the challenges. So the Community Oversight Board, and it was at that point in June that we as a coalition felt that Citizens Review Board was not the appropriate name. It did not communicate the purpose, the oversight, the auditing that we felt was necessary to be a true measure of accountability. And enough members of the Borough Council agreed and termed it the Community Oversight Board. A study committee formed to research that possibility in August 2020, so very quickly. And they worked extremely hard over 4 or 5 months and gave a final report in December 2020. That's also available on the borough's website. There's a link in there if we can send out the PowerPoint. We recommended the auditor model. This is a model kind of categorized by NACOLI. That's the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, and they are the expert source on oversight boards. The model that we wanted is generally the one they went with. And it was pointed out in a very recent working meeting that the Borough Council can negotiate in upcoming collective bargaining with the police union to make some of the things that may have been termed very difficult or impossible actually possible if those negotiations can include some of those components. The Mental Health Task Force also gave their final report in November of 2020 after lots of difficulties that Leslie went over. And their recommendations were some really helpful initial steps on how do we collect data within the mental health system to make sure it's equitable, make sure it's serving everyone the way it should, make sure there are no gaps. It streamlines the process between different systems to eliminate some of those gaps, and it recommends the forming of either a fully civilian or a co-responder crisis team, that's police and mental health professionals, which the borough has allocated some funding towards. There were also those presentations on use of force policies and policing data over the summer of 2020. Those were very quick responses, which was really nice to see. We learned, for example, through those use of force presentations, that although community members in the State College Borough, 4.5% of residents in the borough are Black, but Black folks in the borough make up 15% in 2019 and 16% in 2020 of all use of force reports. And that's incredibly important to know because it's very disproportionate. And knowing that kind of information enables us to ask questions and push for greater justice. The challenges, unfortunately, that we ran into are that there are some state laws, Act 111, as you see, that are a primary barrier to some of the things that would really be helpful in terms of accountability for the Community Oversight Board. It's also the case that some council members flat out oppose any sort of auditing or investigating powers by this body that is supposed to provide oversight. That oversight board will also not be in place likely until 2022. Part of that could be a positive because it allows for collective bargaining to occur before that's implemented, but it's a very long time to wait if we're looking for accountability in our policing systems. In addition, Resolution 1258 promises to fund the COD from existing police funds, and that's not what happened. When the budget for 2021 was passed, the composition of the council at the time decided that that was not important to them, and they funded it from emergency funds instead. The Mental Health Task Force, in addition, they did many very positive things. They were not willing to work on divesting firearms from mental health crises, which is a simple and obvious step to reduce the lethality of mental health crisis calls if they do not already contain a firearm. That task force included multiple chiefs of police and the district attorney, which may be part of the reason why the task force was unable or unwilling to do that. That implementation in terms of the task force's recommendations is still in process, and you'll also see a reference to that a little bit later on. Melanie, we are to you.
Yeah, I think there are lots of things. You're right about that task force and what the pushback was, and not wanting to tackle that discussion, which is why we can't let it go. It's the most sufficient and obvious way to avoid this in the future.
Right.
So we have some agenda items and some lessons learned on our voyage for 24
Leslie,
months.
I think this.
It'll
I
be
think
24
this
months next week.
I think this one is Melanie's, Leslie.
Oh, sorry.
It's all good. We've all been in this together, right?
Yeah.
We're like one voice here.
We are one voice. I think that's what's important. I think there's the key. You hit it. 320 operates as one voice. We try to get on the same page and move in one direction. So thank you.
Exactly. And now my son just let my crazy dog in the room with me. So we'll see if I get through this. But so the lessons that we have learned, the fragility of political will, resistance, and momentum. National and local attention to the movement for Black lives equals progress in local government within weeks. We saw that with George Floyd, with Breonna Taylor in the summer of 2020. We were able to mobilize those numbers, and immediately that led to what was arguably one of the largest, what is the word I'm looking for? Validations from the council that we've ever received in the form of that resolution. Resignation of one supportive council member shut down that momentum. Dan Murphy, who drafted that resolution, resigned due to personal reasons, and it completely flipped the tide as far as the feel of being in those meetings. They are much more, as Leslie said, abusive, for lack of a better word. The way that we are looked at and the way that we are treated as community members by some members of council is unacceptable, and nobody else would allow that. Larger barriers to progress, collective bargaining with police unions. In the work session that just happened recently, they had the labor attorney sit in on the meeting and discuss Act 111, that Mental Health Act, the way that things that need to exist within that civilian oversight board could brush up against those particular things. That does provide a barrier to what we're able to do. So we have to find, and he made a point to say, arbitration is going to happen. That's not a dirty word. You can go to arbitration and you can win. So don't be afraid of that. But he was concerned about unilateral action on the part of the Borough Council. So these are things that we have to acknowledge and we have to work through in order to get the things that we need from this civilian oversight board, this community oversight board. Qualified immunity, of course, the protections that exist for officers that are so very different than the protections that exist for individual citizens, and the carceral nature of justice, and the mental health system. Just criminalizing mental health is clearly an issue. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry, Matt. And I wanted to just throw in a plug here in terms of that point specifically on, I believe it's this coming Monday, there will be a session specifically about criminalization of the mental health system from Gabby.
Absolutely. So attend that one also. Register for that one. Resulting goals, transforming local government. The average age of our borough council, it's up there. And there were no people of color before Catherine Yapel's interim appointment. Government must be representative, responsive, and accountable. It is up to each of us to get in there and be heard. And if you don't make your voice heard, they will assume there aren't any issues. So you have to just figure out what it is you're passionate about. And we're pretty sure about what we're passionate about. And we get in there and we make our voices heard, even if we have to deal with backlash within that very meeting. And at the local level, it's very much possible. You can get involved with local government by attending meetings, or as many of our members of the coalition are doing now, by running for local office. I'm running for constable in Millheim Borough. It's important, get involved. Local politics is important. Build internal capacity and expand to other townships. We're currently looking at, where do our members live? Obviously, I'm out here in Millheim, I'm in Penns Valley. We have members who live all throughout the State College area. And so we are trying to expand and go to other borough and township and municipality meetings and figure out what the need is and how we can use what we're doing in State College borough politics and expand it outward, because mental health founded by county municipalities, boroughs, these are the ones who have that police funding. So in order to get these things done that we want to get with reallocating funding to mental health, that has to be a collaboration between county and all of these very many municipalities, boroughs, and townships that exist in Centre County, and especially State College area itself. Maintain persistence and follow up. Be at the table. Mental Health Task Force and the Community Oversight Board, very long in the works for implementation. Obviously we have Leslie on the Mental Health Task Force, and we would love to get community members of 320 onto that Community Oversight Board and have voices at these tables. Electoral politics are slow, frustrating, and tedious, but don't cede the space. Keep at it. Know that they will push back. Know that they will utilize all of the tools in their toolbox to keep the status quo, because it's easier, because it doesn't cost more money, or whatever their reasoning is. What we have to do is valid, and it is present. It needs to happen yesterday. Immediate opportunities that we have. State College Borough Council, they meet typically every first and third Monday at 7 p.m. The meeting that is this upcoming Monday is they'll discuss the Mental Health Task Force and the IACP report that's on the agenda. So that won't be something that you can bring up during the public hour, but all of the other things we talked about, you could certainly bring up during the public hour. And we'll be there taking notes on what's going on with this and how we can affect change, and continuing discussions to ensure Borough Council implements that Community Oversight Board. As all of us have mentioned, there are many barriers that are being put up, many suggestions by various Borough Council members as to why we shouldn't have a Community Oversight Board that can audit, that can investigate, that can go in and look at closed cases. Well, then what are we having a Community Oversight Board for? It needs to be able to do what it needs to do so that it provides that transparency. It provides that accountability that the community needs. They were trying to put the focus on trust. And we kept saying, you cannot trust, that doesn't even need to be in your goals, because trust is a natural occurrence if it's earned. Unless it's earned, don't even put it on the paper. So promotion of coalition members for public office. We have Tiara Williams, our co-chair, running for Ferguson Township Supervisor. Divine Lipscomb, running for State College Borough Council. Like I said, I'm running for constable. We have another member running for constable. I'm trying to think. There are so many people getting into it that no matter where you live in the area, you can support. And I checked out the ballot. There are a lot of empty spaces in a lot of those places. So check out the ballot online and see if there's something you might want to run for. See if there's a way that you can affect change and take the changes we're making here and put them elsewhere. Show up, listen, learn, advocate. Be at these tables. Make sure that they see you, that they know you're there. When they see these numbers, when they see us coming out consistently, State College is a very transient area. People come, they go to school, they leave. So we have to let them know this is not going away. We are not going away. And until you fix what needs to be fixed in our communities, we're not going to stop saying these things. So you might as well do it sooner rather than later. And email us at justice.320.coalition@gmail.com to connect.
I heard what you said. You said show up. You said listen, learn, and advocate. And this is what we did. We were community members asleep just like everybody else. But until it comes to your door and knocks in your house, it will make a difference. So while it hasn't arrived at your doorstep, at your address, it still arrived in our community. And if you can say this is your community, there is space for you at the table. And you don't have to know everything. You can start by becoming an ally and joining authority, a commission, or a board. That's not a political state, but it is service. It's public service on these local governments, and we need a voice. This is a historical election, even though it's primary. A lot of people don't vote, but it's coming up, and we have 6 or 7 for the first time in Centre County's history, people of color running for a seat. 2 in Patton, 1 in Ferguson, and 3 are open, right? The mayor was, Ezra's running for mayor, but there are 2 open seats, which is why Divine is also running, and Rich Beaver. Gopal is also running from Penn State Law. So there are lots of people to go meet them, invite them in to your organization when you're having a meeting and get to know them, inspire them. And if you can't lead, you can follow and be supportive. There is always something for you to do and something for you to contribute. So at this time, we're going to pause for a moment and we're going to take some comments or some questions that the audience listening would like to share with us. And we remind you on this wonderful slide that we're coming up on the 2nd anniversary and we want to remember Osaze and we want to honor his legacy. So join us and make sure to keep participating in these next 10 days of action. And Nikki, I think, is also on with us, and Maggie, our newer coalition members, and next generation, that's what I always think. We get tired running in advocacy circles and advocates. We need to pass that torch. So come, here's the 3rd lap coming up. And I think we want to shout out to them, and we appreciate them for helping us do the background stuff and tonight. And also, we hope that they will let us know if there are any questions that we need to answer. I mean, while they look for that, we can tell them and remind the public. Identify your own set of recommendations for what you see and observe that need to be changed. How they police your community. How do they stop you? How do they speak to you? Think about those things. What do you witness? Examine avenues. We're fighting, and we noticed that they don't really have a public way for people to report bias. And most people don't like to go to the oppressor. So if the oppression of the police or the aggressive behavior came from them and you have to go into their office in order to tell somebody about it, you are less likely to report it. And that's what's important. And so we have been on them to try and create an online reporting system for bias that then they can respond to, or another organization could respond to and let them know and support the person making the complaint. There are lots of things you can do and think of that need to be changed. Most heavily, transparency. You can't have truth and honesty and withhold information from the public who is demanding it. You are public officers. You have a public badge, a public name, and a number on your car. There was no legal ramification to withhold those names. So if you want trust to be rebuilt, you need to figure out how to repair the harm. And those are the messages that we have. We're serving. And we want to thank everybody for listening, right? And think about the standard use of force. Yeah. I'm sorry. Do you have a question yet? Somebody, I didn't see anybody wave or give us a hands up.
Right. It says, this is a little one, but are the sample ballots for the upcoming primary live online yet, since the petitioning window just closed?
I didn't see them.
I went online. Well, Robert went online, my husband, and he pulled up who had put their petitions in, who had gotten their signatures and was on the ballot. And that was how we were able to see, but it had Democrats and Republicans. And it also showed those empty spaces, right, where nobody had gotten signatures and nobody was running. So those, you can still do a write-in campaign and get on those ballots. So it's not impossible. Oh, there is a question in the Q&A.
The question is, if we show up to council meetings to advocate the points you have shared, would it be helpful to explicitly make a connection to 320, or is it better to speak from a personal stance? It is very important that everyone speak from a point of self. You have 5 minutes, and that's it. And you need to be concise, and we don't want you to be sidelined because somebody associated you with us. You can have your own opinion and speak them out powerfully.
Absolutely.
I see a question in the chat as well. What can we do to support the candidates running? That is a fantastic question, and it's hard to think about limiting that answer because I think there are a lot of potential opportunities. One of the, I think, a really simple first step, getting in touch with that email address that was on the screen with the coalition. You know, we have connections with folks who are running the campaigns for candidates we're supportive of. We're happy to help folks connect with those. There's a need for phone bankers. There's a need for canvassers. There's a need for neighborhood captains in terms of just getting folks interested and supportive for voting. But also there's, if you're not able or not sure about committing to that level, I mean, in this day and age, honestly, a follow and a share on social media is also a big help. The social networks that we each have are incredibly powerful, especially in local politics. So few people are likely to turn out for these primaries, which is a shame, but it also means that your vote and the votes, the folks that we talk to, have a lot of weight. There are also, links online to donate to each candidate's campaign. So again, our Facebook page, the 320 Coalition's Facebook page, is a way to get in touch with that, but also connecting with us by email is a way to get hooked in one-on-one with some of those sources. And I just see that Nanre put a link in the chat for that. Thank you, that is perfect.
Right, and I think it's important to note that these primaries, especially when we're talking about State College Borough and the Borough Council, are very important because I think there are 6 people running on the Democratic ticket for Borough Council, and there are 3 positions. And it is very important, as we have seen right now with the composition of the Borough Council, to have supportive, progressive voices, diverse voices on that council, and not more of the same. So very important to get out the vote State College Borough for that primary election. I can't emphasize that enough.
See, there is also a question. Can you tell us more about the Community Oversight Board and if it achieves the goals of the resolution? What are the steps you will take if the borough does not adhere to the resolutions? So the Community Oversight Board as a whole, the final report is available online. I won't go through every bit of it. Basically, the auditor model is what they went with, which is what we wanted. There are some limitations based on Act 111 that are frustrating. So there's certain information about internal investigations that can't be given to someone outside of the police force, which is a statewide problem. That's not okay, but it's also not something that can change at the local level. In terms of the 2 main sticking points right now, auditing in the sense of being able to look at closed cases and review them for potential policy changes, that's up in the air. It seems like more council members are coming around to that. Ideally, it would have been much better to have the ability to open cases and audit cases that are not closed. But again, the law and collective bargaining at the moment prevents that, at least according to the experts. I'm not a lawyer. In addition, the investigatory part in terms of the executive director of the oversight board being in the room during certain investigations, that's a really important point that is still at the moment on the table. We want it. Some council members don't. Something that does not appear to be on the table that was in the recommendations is that person asking questions inserting themselves in the investigation that would, again, violate either the Act 11 or the collective bargaining agreement. So there are ways that the Community Oversight Board, this is me speaking, if others want to jump in, please feel free, that it will provide transparency, hopefully provide an alternative to reporting complaints that's not going directly through the oppressors, right, through the police. It will provide accountability in the sense of auditing, going back and checking the work, having a person in the room real time, hopefully, to make sure that inappropriate actions are not happening during investigations. One of the study committee members said, in speaking to the Philadelphia Community Oversight Board, that point is really important. Just a person's presence in the room, even if they can't ask questions, is accountability. So if we get what we hope, it will not be what we started out hoping. So there's more work to be done either way. I'm still hopeful that it will provide a measure of accountability either way. I think we need to continue pushing and pushing in the right places. So in the collective bargaining agreement, connecting with statewide efforts to change parts of Act 111, that's long-term work. But the fact that we are and have been at the table means that we now know these things. That's what showing up means. That's why it's so important in this kind of work that is so tedious and so frustrating and so long. If anyone else wants to jump in, feel free.
Well, that mental health law, right? When is it from? 70 something?
1976.
I mean, I'm not trying to give my age, but that's a couple years before I was born. So it's pretty old. What can we do to advocate and push for reform for these outdated laws? I mean, how much has come out about mental health since that time? How has the way that we see certain things in our society changed in regards to mental health since then? It's absolutely ludicrous that this is something that is holding us back in regards to funding, advocacy, all of these things. And, that counts for so much of the legislation that's holding us back in regards to this Community Oversight Board. We have to keep, like you said, asking those questions, pushing on those things that we can push on, and even those things that seem a little bit out of reach, like old legislation that nobody wants to touch. So
we know that battle, right? We have another member on our coalition who is working with Carriel's law, and we are getting firmly behind that because it's not okay for good officers to lose their job for saving somebody else's life and not get their pension. So there are things that you can sign on and you can do even if you can't write the legislature. So I will bring up, because we didn't talk about this really quickly, but just to say, right, that our efforts continue to progress. And like Jeff said, the outcomes don't look like what we expected. But you need to know that it's progress, right? We have infiltrated the system. We are spinning the wheels. We want to dismantle some of them. But you have to show up and ask intelligent questions, like Melanie said. Even if you don't understand, those questions are valuable. They have to slow down and think about what their process is. Like Melanie brought up about the trust piece. It's very funny that literally Osaze was shot in March 20th, and they approached us and we asked them, well, hold your own forum. But no, Terry had to step in and hold that forum. And when we asked them, the first thing they came up with was, how can we reestablish trust? It isn't even 30 daggone days. I'm not trusting you with a gun to come to my door. I don't want you to come to my school. I don't even want you to help me cross the street right now because you just killed somebody I know in their house and you were supposed to transport them to the hospital. I just need them to get with that basic premise. And they couldn't. And so I think that's the most painful piece. Like, this is 2 years, and we had to wait 22 months before the law case revealed the names of the 3 officers. And here's what's problematic. In any other case, they reveal the names of who the assailant was. If you're not being prosecuted, why shouldn't we know your names? How many times did we show up and ask that question? Until they answered me rudely and told me, but they would be harassed. And I said, oh, but their harassment is not worth my life. My life is worth more than the harassment. And they couldn't understand that. And even last year before that question, we showed up and said, but Chief, if it had been your son, wouldn't you want to know who shot him? And he said, yes.
Right. Public servants working in their capacity as public
And when
servants.
there's no law that prevents you, you just want to what? Cover your ass, which is good, but your ass is now exposed. And how are you going to repair that trust? Because now it looks like it took you 2 years and you're not telling truth. So what is that? A lie by omission? I don't know, perhaps. But what I wanted to share was the progress. So I have to wane myself in the progress. I wanted to read to you the wonderful news and the quiet note that we got from Senator Bob Casey, right? Because when you underestimate the power that a small person, small committee can do, when in fact we are mighty, because we had the US Senator reach out to us and he heard our pleas. So I'm going to share that statement because we're pretty proud of it. He acknowledged without our prompting the statement from Senator Casey on Osaze Osage's death and the 320 Coalition work. As we approach the anniversary of Osaze's death, I want to again offer my condolences to his family. No one should lose a loved one because we as a nation do not have a system in place to properly care for the mental health needs of our families, friends, and neighbors. Across the country, people are angry and hurt that instances of police violence continue to occur, injuring and in some cases killing people of color, people with disabilities, and people with mental health needs. We must do better. I commend the work of the 320 Coalition, which strives to honor the legacy of Osaze and build on the life that he lived. The coalition works to enact meaningful change for the community by addressing crucial issues of racial justice, mental health, and needs and safe and bias-free policing. To support these goals, I plan to reintroduce my LEAD initiative, which consists of 2 bills, the Human Services Emergency Logistics Program, acronym HELP, and the Safe Interactions Act, SIA. These policies would support our communities by diverting non-criminal emergency calls away from 911 and directing them to a 211 or a 988 calling system. By providing robust training to law enforcement on how safely and effectively to interact with people with disabilities and those experiencing mental health crisis, I will also continue to support the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act to bring about real and meaningful change in the way we police minority communities in this country. Together, we can create a safer and more inclusive community for all. I think that's pretty amazing when we think about our work and our outreach and how far we've come in just 2 years. And I think that's a landmark thing for a senator to take knowledge of our tiny little nameless little group of mismatched parts that do this work day in and day out. And so I want to remind everybody as we wrap up to please remember to support us, donate to us, follow our cause, join us for our 10 days of action and the events that we plan to honor Osaze's legacy on March 20th. I think you still got 5 more minutes for any last comments.
I was going to say that was such a good wrap up, Leslie. I do see There's question in the chat.
Yeah.
I'll read it, and then any one of us who wants to jump in can touch on it because it's a good one and it's a tough one. So the question is, what are some of the barriers you see in moving funds away from the police and towards mental health and other services in the community? The 2021 budget did not make the shift of funds. How can we make sure the 2022 budget will be different? And in case you were not aware, the 2021 budget not only it continued the exact same trend in police funding that had been going on since 2017, it increased the police department's budget by about $400,000 in the midst of the pandemic. So any one of the three of us could touch on that, but I want to give someone else a chance if they would like to jump in.
Oh, it's attitudes first.
Right,
A begins with attitude. If they're not receptive to change, we can't write the bills for them, and we can't physically reach into the bank account and move the money. So keep calling them. Tell them. They got angry with us when we suggested you promised to move the money from the budget. And their little source of trickery was to have the chief get on the call and say, well, we have 3 open positions. I won't fill them so that we can do this work. And that enriled and enlisted some haters who thought we told them not to hire who they already hired. That was not the case. The case was you promised to fund the civilian board and the co-responder units with money. It didn't have to be from your police budget for hiring the replacements or the retired personnel, but they wanted to divert their attention to the actual issue. So we need people who show up at those meetings to listen with us. And when they divert it, contest it, because that's the only thing that's going to happen. Then sign up to be on the zoning board, on the budget board. Go here when they're hiring and electing new people to office. When they're hiring people in the borough, apply for those jobs. Like this is insane to think that we all have lived here for probably more than a decade. And this is the first time that we were ever told that we weren't residents, right?
Right.
Every time we call, like all of a sudden we're not because we don't live in the borough boundaries.
But I work there.
But we work there, we live there, we shop there, we support there, we show up every day. You know, we host your community engagement pieces with you. Like, okay.
Sing songs at your festivals.
Yeah, but I got a t-shirt, like the mayor said. I got a t-shirt.
Right.
And Divine is putting in the chat something really important for next year. All the candidates on the PA United slate, which we are in support of, have pledged to work on reallocation. It's important just honestly for our own mental health to know that this year, the council that's going to be voting on the 2022 budget is the council we got. It's not going to be the new folks that we hopefully will vote into office. So just know that. But like Leslie's saying, that there are other opportunities to plug in on the boards, the authorities, the commissions, showing up consistently to the meetings. The budget process for the borough is opaque. They hold a lot of working meetings that are during the day when working folks can't attend, or a fair number of closed sessions, which, you know, those meetings are not necessarily open to the public anyway, but paying attention to when that is in process so that we can at least make our voices heard. You know, we want to be convincing people. We want to be moving things in the right direction. When folks are not convincible, there is value to being a thorn in the proverbial side, just to be honest. Because
you said something quick, Jeff. You said something really important about the showing up in the hearing. And even if you're not involved with these issues, when they hold an open public hearing session, we need you to show up. It can't be the same 12 of us or the 30 of us. They know us, right? I mean, by now they know us. So bring your friend. Run around your neighborhood where you live and tell people there's a call about this tonight. And I mean that for everybody sincerely. Where you live, Pine Grove Mills needs help. Penns Valley needs help. Ferguson Township needs help. Patton needs help. And people are watching what we're doing. So we have coalition members on most of these teams and they do their thing. And we were happy that even though we were pressing the borough so hard, we had colleagues that were pressing and working in Patton Township. And they are doing some wonderful work. So there are some good changes afoot. Stay ahead of the game and just be present. Thank you.
Yes.
And one other thing I'll just say, this is very specific, but I'm pedantic, so I get hung up on things like this. But I do think it's important to recognize that the council had an opportunity this past year to reallocate those funds without affecting anyone's job. They were at 53 police officers. They were funded up to, I think, 60. And they decided to increase funding rather than simply readjusting the budget to the amount of police they had. And the argument this year, if those positions are filled, will be that, well, now we're taking away people's jobs. And that is not our objective, but it is our objective to reallocate funding because we want to reallocate our society's priorities. It is important in the name of accountability to point out these are a result of your choices. We told you.
I think that's a good point, Jeff. You're right on target, because here's the real issue, right? Had they taken the recommendations that they originally got in 2016 for the issues of tasing a Black female, the first time they got issued the right to use a taser, and then not even 3 years later, they get to use their guns at a mental health call, and the only person that's shot and dead is a Black young man. So the problem with that is you have to say that there is either bias, because in a town full of more than 45,000, and there's less than 8% people of color, the first 2 people you injure are Black. You should take ownership of that. And then talk to me about that should now become a priority because somebody died. Not that we have to then reform 6 more task force, which we have done, to talk about and discuss the issues that you ignored 4 years ago, which now is 5 years. So we need to remember that it moves really slowly, and it becomes trapped in a cyclical negative pattern unless we interrupt the pattern of thinking. And that's what it is. If you keep denying it rather than saying, you know what, I know it's wrong, but what could we do to change it? And even though we're working on that procedure, they are not. And so until we can get them to shift their perspective, right? If they're fabulously trained and they all got CIT training, then why did no one use their de-escalation techniques? There should never be somebody dead in 3 minutes when they can argue with people who are battling and hurting other people, including themselves, and they're willing to take those punches. So I don't buy it. It's sad. And it's going to have to start internally. When I say internally, each one of those people who put on a badge every morning. And you know what? We don't think everybody's bad, but you are bad and failing at your job if you are not interrupting the cycle or the pattern. Because there is a cycle and there is a pattern of behavior. And you're not looking at your brother going, you know what? You shouldn't do that. Check them. If you're not using your voice and saying, you know what, brother, that was wrong. We shouldn't be stepping on somebody's neck. Okay. But you know how we had to put pressure on to get those 5 local police officers to make those statements. And some of them were pitiful and not even signed. So I'm sure your heart wasn't in it, but I'm glad you had to make it anyway. And so now that it's black and white and it's on paper, I'm going to hold you to those promises. Another one of us should not die on your watch.
We shouldn't have to fight the current, right? Like, it's like we're fighting against the current, but why isn't it going with us? Imagine how much more work we'd be able to get done if we didn't have to push against the current every time we're trying to get change.
Every time. But you know what, Mel? We get to win because we're willing to swim upstream. So I don't want to hold us too long because you know that's what happens. I get amped up every time I close this down. We'll be here all night. You know that's right. So I'm just going to close with the famous quote that we use all the time. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. That's Margaret Mead. Very simple, but it's very true. So thank you and good night. And please donate to honoring Osaze's legacy. Look for our GoFundMe page on Facebook. It's there. Look at our emails, join our listserv.
Register for all of our events for the 10 days, our run walk, Memorial Run Walk on the 20th. And come out, show up.
Thank you all.
Look forward to seeing you.
Thank you.
Good night. And somebody can pause the recording.